Hello everyone. Today we're going to be replacing a oil pan gasket on this N52K engine. So the first thing I like to do is remove the cabin air filter assembly. You're going to remove both halves, the upper and lower half. And the only reason I'm doing this is just so that you can take the plastic engine beauty cover off. Now get a screwdriver here and pop these clips. You can take the wire loom off at the bottom. Now in your trunk you should have this tow hook. So you'll find a spot right next to the oil filter housing here, and you just thread that in. This is the point you're going to use to hold the engine up with. Now go ahead and remove your air cleaner assembly. Now on the air cleaner there's going to be a mass airflow sensor hooked up to it, so make sure you disconnect that sensor, and then you can use a screwdriver to loosen the clamp for the air snorkel. Disconnect your steering coupler from the rack and pinion. So you can unbolt this pinch bolt, and then you can pull back on this coupler and it should come apart. Some of them can be stubborn, so you're going to have to just work on it. And then also there's going to be a couple of cooler line clamps that need to be, the bolts need to be removed. This one underneath the air cleaner, and here's the other one in front. There'll be a third one, but we'll get to that later. Now you're going to need an engine support brace. This can be purchased at Harbor Freight. They're pretty cheap. If I remember, I'll try and put the link in the notes. Now raise the vehicle and remove all the belly pans, remove the front wheels, and remove everything all the way back behind the transmission, all the plastic paneling that's back there. And at this time, go ahead and drain your oil. And you're going to remove the lateral strut, I believe it's called, underneath the engine cradle here. It's held on by 16mm bolts. Now we can start taking everything apart here. So I'm going to remove the sway bar links here. Some people do not remove the sway bar, but I find it's just a lot easier to remove the sway bar completely. It's not a big deal. Remove your tie rod end nuts. These are 21mm. Remove your rack and pinion bolts. Driver's side will have a nut on top of it, so you're going to need a wrench to break that one loose. Now go ahead and take all your control arm bolts off with the 18mm. Socket or wrench, whatever you prefer. Just go ahead and unbolt all the arms. remove 4 bolts for the engine mounts. You'll see little access holes to access them. Now you can remove the bolts for the subframe assembly. Remove everything but 2, one on each side, so that you can put the hoisting device underneath it. Now once you have the cradle properly supported, you can remove the last 2 bolts. The cradle should be free now. So at this point, this is when you can get that 3rd bolt that holds that cooler line up on top. If you have an automatic transmission, you're going to have to remove the cooler lines. It's held on there by a 13mm bolt. And then you're going to find 2 brackets on the side that actually hold the cooler lines to the oil pan. You just need to loosen the 2 nuts. There'll be one, I'll show you here, on the rear, and then there'll be one towards the front. Plug the cooler lines so you don't make a mess all over the place. And then you could just move the lines to the side. They're pretty maneuverable. Remove the bracket that holds the oxygen sensor connectors in place. And you can actually start removing all the oil pan bolts. There are a lot of bolts, so take them all off. Now to get the oil pan out, there's a lot of leeway. You can move the cradle around quite a bit. Just watch the power steering lines. Make sure you don't stretch them. On this engine, you have to replace the bolts. They're not reusable. I use 2 plastic ties to help hold the gasket in place, and this will aid in getting the oil pan back into position. Now remember, like I told you, you can move this around quite a bit. Just make sure that you have the power steering lines free. Even if there's a bracket or anything that holds the lines in place, go ahead and loosen them up just to give you enough clearance. And you can see here, I've got tons of clearance to get this oil pan back on. Once you have it in place, go ahead and start a couple of bolts, and you can go ahead and cut the plastic ties off. Now you can cinch the bolts down, but do it very lightly. I have my drill here set at a very light setting because you're going to have to torque these down. Now, depending on the size of the bolts that you're using, the torque's going to be different. This one here is using 8 Newton meters. So look at your specifications for your particular vehicle as to what the torque should be. Now, once you have the initial torque set, I use a Sharpie and I just put a mark on each bolt because you're going to have to turn this another 90 degrees, which I'm showing you here. And then you're all set. So once you have everything torqued down, first thing you're going to do is reconnect your transmission cooler lines back. And don't forget about the cooler line up front when you put the cradle up in place. Pretty much from this point on, you're just going to you're putting everything back together. Just use common sense. It's really not that difficult. There are some parts here where I may have left out some footage, but like I said, this is pretty much going to get you to where you want to be, where you should be able to complete this task with no problems. Now at this point, go ahead and reconnect your steering coupler to the rack. It's easier because now that the rack is all loose, you can actually play around with it quite a bit. So it should be a lot easier to install. And also don't forget about your cooler line up front, as I mentioned before. Now you're in the home stretch. Just line up your cradle and then start installing all the bolts. And I actually torqued these down to 80 foot-pounds, but like I said, double check your specifications to your particular application because they may be different. Reinstall your engine mount bolts. You can use a small Phillips screwdriver to help you line them up. So long as you have enough tension on the brace on top of the engine, they should be really easy to move around so you can get the alignment correct. Now you're in the home stretch. Go ahead and put all your arms back together, your sway bar, everything that you took off previously. So from here I think you're pretty much on your own. I don't think there's really much else I can explain to you. this will pretty much conclude this video. So I hope I explained everything as best I could. Good luck, everyone. And if you have any questions, please post a comment and I'll try and respond as quickly as possible. And of course, subscribe or like my videos, and I will try and make more in the near future.